The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Afghanistan was Canada's longest war. On this Remembrance Day, we'll hear why, for some veterans of that conflict, bringing Afghan interpreters here to Canada is their new mission. Then, some who fell more than 100 years ago in the First World War are only now getting a proper burial. We'll find out how. And we'll also get the most remarkable story of revenge from the son of a Jewish Royal Air Force pilot who flew numerous bombing missions over Nazi Germany. It's Thursday, November 11th, and that's all ahead, lest we forget, on the agenda. Canadian forces serving in Afghanistan relied on local Afghans to help them make their way with the language and culture. But when the Taliban took back control of that country this year, leading thousands to flee for their lives, those who'd helped our soldiers became targets themselves. Corey Shelson is a retired Canadian Armed Forces captain and part of a group of veterans now helping Afghan interpreters to escape that country and settle here. And he joins us now from London, Ontario. Corey, it's good to meet you. How are you doing?
Good, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you on. In your view, what is our moral obligation to these interpreters that served alongside our soldiers?
Well, we made a commitment. The Canadian government made a commitment to the interpreters who worked with the Canadian Armed Forces during our deployment to Afghanistan. And the Canadian government made a commitment to bring them to Canada, to bring their families to Canada, and to allow them to enjoy the freedoms that we as Canadians enjoy every day. And unfortunately, the Canadian government has not come through on that promise. And as a result, we've got a whack of people that are stranded in a very tough, difficult situation in Afghanistan.
Give us a sense of how close the working relationship was between these interpreters, advisors, helpers, and your people.
So I can speak from my experience personally. I was deployed as a combat engineer officer. I deployed in 2010, and our job was to build the camps and essentially clear the roads and the pathways that soldiers would walk on, because the weapon of choice by the Taliban at the time was the improvised explosive device or the roadside bomb. Interpreters were key to our ability to operate in Afghanistan. They patrolled with us. They slept in our camps. They wore our uniforms. And we worked together every single day while I was deployed. They were our eyes and ears on the ground. They allowed us to communicate with the locals, and it allowed the locals to communicate with us. They also listened to the radio, and they were able to intercept Taliban communications. And so the interpreters were a lifeline to us. They listened. They were able to decipher what was a real threat and what wasn't, and were able to give us forewarning when an ambush might come so that we could take up a defensive posture. And so the interpreters were key to the ability for guys like myself to stay alive.
And understandably, you feel indebted to them right now, given the good work they did for us. What lengths have veterans such as yourself gone to in order to help these folks out?
Well, there was a previous special immigration program that was in place from 2009 until 2012, whereby several hundred Afghan interpreters were brought to Canada through that program. Unfortunately, the program ended in 2012, and between 2012 and 2021, there were politicians, veterans, and concerned citizens that did their best to try and get some of these interpreters to Canada, but had a very tough time getting that through Parliament. When the Taliban took back Afghanistan, the veteran community at large started receiving all sorts of pleas for help from Afghans that we worked with. We were receiving those through text message, through Facebook, and whatever communication channels people were using to stay in contact with those folks that we had developed very strong relationships with. And starting in June, as the Taliban were rapidly taking back Afghanistan, the veteran community basically volunteered. A number of people volunteered, started working together, and started moving these folks into safe houses as a way to stage them for what we believed would be the eventual evacuation from Kabul by airplane. And the bulk of the folks who came to Kabul were invited by the Canadian government when they announced that there would be an evacuation taking place. And up until about a week ago, the veteran-led NGO called Amin Laura was housing upwards of 1,800 people in safe houses across Kabul. They were providing food, shelter, medical support, emotional support, and also helping with the application process. To fund those, the veteran community, we raised over $2.5 million from over 2,200 Canadian donors. But unfortunately, that money has now run out, and Amin Laura was forced, unfortunately, to scale back those safe houses, and those 1,800 people, for the most part, are now out on the streets.
For those people who are on the streets and who are still in Afghanistan and waiting for our help, what kind of threats are they facing on a daily basis?
Well, I mean, the new government, i.e. the Taliban, what we've observed is the crimes and the killings are happening in the shadows. So they're doing a good job of keeping it off the news, but we're receiving regular reports coming in through folks that we're talking to on the ground. We've been provided video footage of Taliban executing a police officer within the last 14 days. We've received reports of Taliban killing a midwife in a hospital when a baby was being born. We've seen national Olympian level athletes being captured and interrogated, beaten up and bruised. And unfortunately, we've seen the execution of interpreters that work for Canada. And they are literally capturing these folks in the middle of the night. They are tying their hands behind their back. They're shooting them in the face and then dropping them on the front doorstep of their families' homes and then denying it that it was them in the first place. And so there is a real threat to the population who have ties to coalition forces, and it's getting worse day by day.
Are you, Corey, still in direct contact with any of those folks over there that were helpful to us?
So Amin Laura, the Canadian-led NGO that I was just speaking of, as of this morning, I received an update that Amin Laura is in contact with 2,761 families, which account for 13,261 people. So we are definitely in contact with a tremendous number of affected Afghans, and we are doing our absolute best to help advocate for this voiceless community and ask the government of Canada to expedite the approval process so we can try and get some more out of the country.
Let me just do a little fact checking here, because I have heard that you personally helped rescue one of your former interpreters who was so essential to your work over there, along with his wife and his 18-month-old daughter. Have I got that right?
Well, I was a link in the chain.
Oh, you're so typically Canadian modest. But that's good. We get that. We get that. Tell me, how did you do it?
So when this all started, I was thinking to myself, how can I help? What can I do? And I think the best place that I could support was by bringing awareness, by speaking to individuals like yourself. But it was really important at the time to try and tell the story of these trapped individuals. And I was able to be reintroduced to an interpreter that I worked with back in 2010, who was trapped in Lashkar, Helmand province, which is in the southwest of Afghanistan. And what I was trying to do was gather some information about how bad was the threat, what did his life look like, so that I could pass that on to the Canadian population through interviews like this. It was during that process of speaking with him that the Taliban took over Lashkar, and he sent a call for help to me by text message saying, if I don't get out of here within the next 24 hours, I'm afraid I'm going to be dead. And most likely my wife will be taken, and the Taliban will take her and wed her, and my daughter will be taken into, basically custody within the Taliban. And so I was the person who received the plea for help, and I leveraged the network of veterans and the connections that we had on the ground. And within a few days, we were actually able to coordinate with the Afghan National Army, which was still operating at the time, to get a helicopter to pick him up out of Helmand province and fly him to safety. We were able to help coordinate with his wife and daughter to get them driven to one of the safe houses. And we were also able to help get his younger brother out. Luckily enough, they were accepted as part of the immigration program, and they've since settled in Ontario and are starting English school and getting their jobs. So, I mean, it's proof that this is possible. And I think if a hodgepodge group of veterans who have come together doing this on the side of our desk, literally, volunteering, if we can get folks out of the country, surely the Canadian government must be able to do the same.
If for privacy reasons you don't want to identify where they are, that's fine. But how are they adapting to their new country?
They're doing great. I mean, obviously there are some, it's a different culture. It's a different place to live. The first time I took him to a grocery store, he was like, "What is this place?" I was like, "Oh, this is a grocery store." And, I said, "Here, take the shopping cart and go grab the things that you need." And he came back with, 2 or 3 small items, unlike most Canadians who go and fill up our shopping cart and pack our cupboards. I asked him, I said, what was it like where you lived? And he's like, "Well, I lived in a 3-bedroom home. Myself, my wife, and my brother lived in myself, my wife, and my daughter in 1 bedroom. My other brother in the 2nd bedroom, and my 3rd brother with his wife and 4 children were in the 3rd bedroom. They didn't have electricity. They had running water, but it wasn't potable, and they did not have a fridge, and they cooked over an open fire." And so if you think about the culture shock that I experienced going to Afghanistan, it's an equivalent culture shock of them coming to Canada. But I can tell you the smiles on their faces, seeing them get into their apartment, and also seeing the local community rally to donate. Literally, we outfitted 2 apartments with furniture, clothing, dishes, staples, so that they didn't have to spend any of their money on getting those apartments set up. And to all the Canadians that continue to support this effort, thank you so much from all of us that are working on it. We would not be able to do this without your financial donations and your donations of furniture and clothing and whatnot. It's really making a difference for these folks.
Do you want to say what the local community was?
Due to the security situation, I'm not going to comment on that.
Okay, that's fine. How many interpreters have you and your team managed to get out of Afghanistan to date?
Leading up and during the air evacuation that was led by the Canadian government and was facilitated by the brave men and women of our Canadian Armed Forces, which we must reinforce how good of a job they did. They were really tasked with a tough situation. And the soldiers did, I think, the absolute best they could with what was given to them. During that period, our team helped support the evacuation of around 1,500 folks that we were in contact with. Since the air bridge closed, so since the American-led evacuation closed and essentially the airport closed, we've been able to move almost another 400 people out of Afghanistan by methods that we've coordinated on our own. I'm talking driving them to a border in a secure convoy, and also evacuating them by air to neighboring countries. And we've done that all with the money that we've raised from the donations of generous Canadians, and we continue to do that to date.
Let me read a quote to you that I've seen in the popular press, as they call it. "While other countries send buses and helicopters to help Afghans who worked alongside them, Canada sent emails." Is that a fair characterization of what this country has done so far?
Well, we did send soldiers. Our Canadian Special Operations Regiment was on the ground, and they did one heck of a job. Talk about a complex situation and a very high-risk situation. And so I don't want to take anything away from the soldiers that serve this country, because they do the best with what they're given. But soldiers can only they can only operate within the confines that they're tasked to operate within. What I mean is, I don't think the soldiers on the ground were given the flexibility and latitude that some other countries were. We saw other countries leaving the wire, going outside the wire, and physically picking up their refugees or their affected individuals and literally bringing them back into the airport. And we didn't see that with what our politicians allowed the Canadian forces to do. And I'm not privy to the information as to why. But what I can say is that I think our government departments and our ministers, I think they could have done a much better job in collaborating with each other, having better and more transparent communication with the applicant population. But I do think we were probably restricted based on the number of people that could be evacuated based on the number of aircraft that were coming in and out of that airport. There were only so many seats on so many planes, and hats off to the soldiers that were working on it. But from a political and government department level, I think we could have done a heck of a lot more.
Well, you say you don't know why we haven't, but I want to push you on that a little bit. Why do you think we have been so unambitious in our approach to resolving this?
My gut tells me the Prime Minister didn't want to have a dead Canadian soldier on the front page of the newspaper. And I believe that the Liberal Party of Canada feared that if by trying to evacuate individuals from Afghanistan, if an unfortunate event had have occurred and a Canadian soldier had lost their life, that would have prevented them from securing the majority government that I think they were trying to get with the election that they called. And so I think this is my personal perspective, that this was all tied to a lot of the government's mishandling of this situation were directly tied to the election and all of the managing of risk that goes along with trying to secure a majority government. And that, for me, is what is probably the most sad thing of this. I don't think an election should have been called in the middle of one of the most brutal humanitarian disasters that we've seen in a very, very long time. $610 million was spent on that election, and I don't think it accomplished much. And I think a lot of Canadians feel the same. Yet we've been asking and begging for funding for months, and we've received limited funding from the government of Canada that can't be used for some of the key activities that and Laura is conducting, like paying for safe houses. The money couldn't be used for safe houses. So you spend $610 million on an election, but we can't get $5 million out of the government to pay for plane tickets and safe houses. So I think there's a lack of, I think the priorities are completely out of whack within our government. And I also think this could have been a massive win for the politicians leading this country, because I believe that the Canadian population is very much behind that. And I'm seeing it every single day with the donations and the financial support we're getting from Canadians all over the country. I'm talking $250,000 donations from wealthy family offices down to $25 donations from senior citizens on fixed incomes. This is something that Canadians care about. And I think there's a massive opportunity for the new cabinet to get some positive wins out of this by just making it a priority and helping to get the most vulnerable people, who are those that are inside of Afghanistan, out of that country and here to Canada.
I take your point, Corey, on the political timing of all of this, but that election that you just referenced, I mean, it's been over for almost 2 months. So what's stopping them from getting their act together now?
Well, I'm not a politician, and so I'm learning a lot of this as we go. But from the day the writ was dropped, which is the day they call the election, the government goes into this caretaker mode where not a lot seems to happen. And we're still in that caretaker mode. And I don't think cabinet's going to sit for another couple of weeks. And as a result, it's very hard to get anything done. And so, as much as our team has been collaborating with, chiefs of staff, with ministers, and with various government departments, I think a lot of people's hands are tied. And I think this is one of the hard parts about the way our government is set up is I don't think the IRCC or our intergovernmental departments are necessarily set up to deal with this type of catastrophe that requires immediate action.
Well, hang on. I'm going to jump in on that, Corey. I'm going to jump in on that because the caretaker provision that you've referred to means that no government is supposed to do anything controversial that probably doesn't have the support of all the members of the House of Commons. This surely does. So again, I'm not blaming you here, obviously, but I don't get what the excuse is for inaction when surely this would be an issue that would have broad support in the House of Commons and in the country.
I absolutely agree. And this is why, I'm talking to you today, and why I continue to take every interview that's offered to me is I think people in Canada need to know that this stuff is happening. I don't think a lot of people know that we're this inefficient at getting things done. And I mean, these are folks trapped in a country on the other side of the world that served us, that worked for us, that answered our call for help. And what I'm really concerned about is what the heck's going to happen next time the government of Canada decides to deploy the sons and daughters of this country to another bad place that needs our support? How the heck are we going to go get local translators, local contractors, and local workers to support our mission when we are absolutely failing those that we promised to bring to Canada during our deployment to Afghanistan?
Well put. Corey Shelson, retired captain, thank you for your efforts, and we appreciate you coming on to TVO tonight and sharing your views on this important subject.
Thank you much, Steve. I really appreciate your support.
Tens of thousands of soldiers died fighting for Canada, far from home on foreign battlefields. Most were never returned to Canadian soil. Some have never been identified. Sarah Lockyer is the Casualty Identification Coordinator and a forensic anthropologist with the Canadian Armed Forces. And she now helps lead a team that's working to remedy that. And Sarah Lockyer joins us now from the nation's capital in Ottawa South. And Sarah, it is great to have you on TVO tonight. I want to just take people, I guess, through some of the background of what you do, and then we'll chat some. So Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this graphic up to start with. The Canadian Armed Forces Casualty Identification Program began in 2007. More than 27,000 Canadian soldiers have no known graves. From the First World War, 20,000 still unaccounted for. From the Second World War, 7,000 still unaccounted for. And in the Korean conflict, as they call it, but yes, it was a war, 16 still unaccounted for. The Casualty Identification Program has identified the human remains of 32 Canadian soldiers, and the team is currently trying to identify 42 sets of remains and 42 graves marked as unknown soldiers. This is, I'm sure, utterly fascinating, but also very important work, and it's great that you've joined us tonight on this day in particular to remember this. Sheldon, why don't we bring this picture up right now? Here's a picture of unearthing of Canadian soldiers' remains in Belgium. Can you just, Sarah, describe what we're seeing here and tell us how remains are usually discovered in the first place?
Typically, remains are discovered because of farming activity or construction work. And many times when construction work is being planned, there has to be a munitions clearing process because there's quite a bit of unexploded ordnance, especially in France and in Belgium. But in that particular photo, it was a circumstance where we had irrefutable evidence where the remains of a Canadian soldier was resting. We had found partial remains, and we were pretty confident we would be able to collect the rest. And my predecessor was able to go overseas and collaborate with a Belgian archaeology firm. And that's what you see in that photograph. It is that process of recovering those remains.
So you recovered the remains, and were you actually, at the end of the day, able to identify who that was?
Yes, we were. And with the help of the Canadian Forces Forensic Odontology Response Team, the forensic dentist, they were able to compare his dental information and his personnel file to confirm his identification.
And do you know whether there was any family that you could actually repatriate those remains to?
Yes, we were able to contact the families, but the remains are not repatriated to Canada. They are buried in the closest appropriate cemetery to where they fell. So this particular soldier, Private Kenneth Duncanson, was buried in Evasion War Cemetery in Belgium, and his family was there in attendance.
And they are content to have him, to have his eternal resting place be the place where he gave his life for his country.
Correct. And it's the policy that we use for any Canadian soldier, airman, or Navy personnel who died in combat before 1970. They are buried in the closest appropriate cemetery to where they fell, which is what other Commonwealth nations also abide by through this concept of equality in death. So they will be buried with their comrades overseas where they fell.
Okay, let's bring up, Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up the second picture here. And why don't you just describe for us what it is that we're seeing here?
This here is a shoulder title from the 73rd Royal Highlanders of Canada. And this was an artifact that was found with the remains of Sergeant Shaughnessy from the First World War, who died at the Battle of Hill 70. And this key piece of information was able to allow us to narrow down the list of potential candidates quite significantly to be able to identify the remains of Sergeant Shaughnessy.
Well, you've anticipated my next question, because I presume, hundreds, if not thousands of people wore that shoulder title. So how would you be able to narrow it down to just that one person?
Well, for this particular case, my colleagues who are historians was able to take the exact location where the remains were discovered, and they were able to determine that it was in fact the 13th Battalion who was active in that area. So why did we find a shoulder title from the 73rd Royal Highlanders in an area where only the 13th Battalion was active? Well, through further research, we found out that the 73rd was disbanded, and 7 from the 73rd had been sent to the 13th Battalion. So then that gave us a much smaller list just based on that one piece of information to be able to track where these soldiers had gone through and which regiment they had been a part of.
I see. Now, that pretty clearly, when you find something like that, that pretty clearly identifies the soldiers having fought for Canada. What other artifacts might you find that would allow you to conclude categorically that's a Canadian soldier and not someone from another country?
Quite often we find, admittedly, Commonwealth equipment. So there's no national identifiers. You'll find things like general service buttons, or the type of equipment that they receive doesn't have any national identifiers on it. But many times we'll find buttons with Canada on it. We'll find some cap badges that has the regimental insignia on it, and other things like that. And rarely, but sometimes it happens, we will find an identification disc, or what we know today as a dog tag.
Gotcha. And that's what you just described there?
Yes, exactly. And that's the identification disc that was found with Sergeant Shaughnessy. But what's important to remember during the First World War is that the Canadians were issued an identification disc made out of a leather type cardboard material that actually decomposes. So those metal identification discs that are found, those are things that the soldiers paid for them to get created. So it's not something that was standard issue at the time. So we don't find them very frequently.
Interesting. Now, I would not have thought that more than 100 years ago there would be great dental records kept of the soldiers before they went overseas to fight. And yet you told us earlier you do some sort of teeth slash enamel matching up. So how does all that work?
Well, there are some limitations with the dental records, because for whatever reason, the dental records of the soldiers who died during the First World War are not in the personnel file. They are in the files of those who survived. So at some point, somebody decided that that information wasn't useful anymore for the soldiers who died during the First World War. However, for those who died during the Second World War, the dental records are in the personnel files, and I've seen x-rays as well in the personnel files from time to time. So using the dental analysis and being able to engage with the Canadian Forces Forensic Odontology Response Team can only really happen for for Second World War cases and those from the Korean conflict.
I get you. But it sounds like, just from the numbers we gave off the top, that most of your work is focusing on First World War vets. Is that right?
It is. That is correct. They are the vast majority of the cases that I'm working on. At this time, I only have 2 from the Second World War, and everything else is from the First. So.
And where the 2 from the Second World War, where would they be?
Right now, we're looking at something in Germany, and the other case, I believe, is in the Netherlands.
Gotcha. Now, I'm going to assume here that when you find the remains, let's say, of skeletal remains, I mean, these are people who came to their demise, I have to assume, in most of them, in incredibly violent circumstances. So what are you actually finding?
Well, it all depends on a case-by-case basis, but yes, it is skeletal remains. So there's no more organs or skin or anything like that. And it depends on a number of different circumstances, but sometimes we'll find a skeleton that's about 80% or more complete, or sometimes we'll find instances where we have less than 25% of the skeleton. So it depends on a number of different circumstances, what happened directly after the war, if there's been any activity on that soil since then, usually yes. And it all depends on how well they were preserved as well in the soil.
But would it be the case that if you've only found 25% of a skeletal remain, it's because that soldier was blown up?
I mean, we can only speculate at this point. There isn't that much detailed information in the personnel files, especially from the First World War. So it's not really necessarily something that I spend too much time trying to determine exactly how they died, because we know that they died during the war.
Right. How much does DNA matching help you do what you do?
DNA is a great tool. It does work, it is something that we use in about 99% of our cases. Almost all of them go through DNA analysis. However, it's not as easy as what people see on television through shows like CSI and things like that. There can be some complications with DNA analysis, but it is definitely a great tool that we utilize very, very often to confirm an identification.
Okay, let's bring up, Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up this picture at the top of page 4 here. And this is, I gather, one of your more recent discoveries, Sarah. Who's the young man on the left in this picture?
The young man on the left is Private John Lambert from the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. And we were able to confirm his identification and announce it to the public in December of 2020.
And what was it that you announced?
That we had confirmed his identification. His remains had been discovered through an archaeological excavation that was happening in Belgium. And that once COVID allowed us to do so, that he would be getting a full military burial in a cemetery in Belgium, and he would be buried with his name, by his regiment, and in the presence of family.
That fellow looks awfully young. How old was he?
He died when he was 17 years old.
He volunteered to go fight 100 years ago at the age of 17.
16, actually, when he enlisted. He lied about his age, and he was 16 years old and then died at the age of 17.
My goodness. You know, I don't want to be overly maudlin about this, but that's, I don't know. How does that hit you, finding the remains of somebody who's only 17 years old?
It was a bit jarring, because it was immediately evident to me when I was looking at his remains that he was very young, that he was still growing, and he was definitely in adolescence. So that was immediately evident to me. And then when the families sent us his photograph, that's when it was even more apparent of just how young he was. And you think back at what I was doing at 16, 17 years old, and it's just not comparable of being able to think about going to war at that young an age.
And he did have family members who were able to go overseas and participate in a final ceremony, is that right?
Well, Private Lambert has not been buried yet. Because of the situations we find ourselves in with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had to delay his burial, and we're hoping that we'll be able to have that happen in 2022.
Gotcha. Do you know that he has family members who are still around and know about this information? Yes. He does?
Yes, absolutely, yes. And the family was officially notified by current members of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and I know that quite a few of them are hoping to be able to make their way over to Belgium to be there that day.
How many of these ceremonies / funerals have you personally been able to attend?
I think I'm about 10 now, is that I've been able to attend.
What's it like?
It's quite emotional. Through the entire process of going through the investigation, I try as much as possible not to get too emotional about the process. But then we get to the ceremonies. I speak with the soldiers from the regiment who are there to bury one of their own. I get to speak to the families and interact with them and get an understanding of what this means for them. And then when the burial actually occurs, the emotion can't really be described. It's a bizarre thing where it's quite of a happy occasion, because he's been identified, his name and his face has been returned to them. But at the same time, with the solemn recognition of why he died and what he died for, kind of all come together to make a rather special and emotional ceremony. Now,
the First World War vets obviously would have died 100 years ago, and that means you're dealing with great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, great nieces and nephews, that kind of thing. Is there still a connection there?
Yes. Now, it's quite rare to have grandchildren, because many of them did not have children before they died. But many times it can be, we had one family member who was a nephew. He was a direct nephew of the soldier who had died. But other times it's great nephews, great nieces. Sometimes they're quite a bit removed as well. But I find that the majority of the time, there still very much is that connection where the family tell me stories of how the memory of that service member had been told by a number of different family members, and it was kept alive within their family.
Yeah, you would think there would be family stories and lore that would have gone down through the years, but is it ever, I don't know if this is an inappropriate question, but is it ever odd to sort of be reunited with somebody you clearly never met, and in some cases maybe, you know, obviously didn't know, but you may be a very distant relative at this point?
Right. Well, I can't speak on behalf of the families as to what they feel, but it's quite evident that even though they may not have met them, there's still a connection there, and there's still an aspect of remembrance and of recognizing their sacrifice, which can still very much hold that emotional component to the process.
Sarah, just finally, I find that when I have talked over the years to people who do the kind of thing that you are involved in right now, they don't do it because they want to do it or like to do it. They do it because they need to do it. They have to do it. They feel this is a mission for them. So tell me what's the motivation for you to do this?
For me personally, as a forensic anthropologist, the points or my goal that I always come back to is to return their identity to them. They died for their country. They were lost, some of them over 100 years. And I think it's the least we can do, because when you interact with people, usually the first piece of information you share about yourself is your name. And to me, thinking that some of these men have been nameless and faceless for over a century, that's not right. So if I can do my small part and return their name and their face to them, then it makes for quite a privilege and an honor to be able to do that for them and for their families as well.
And I presume you've talked to today's Canadian Forces soldiers. What do they think about the work you're doing?
Correct. Actually, many of my colleagues are Canadian Armed Forces members, and for them, they very much feel that this perpetuates the notion and the knowledge for them that if something were to happen to them today, that there is somebody within the Canadian Armed Forces who will be working towards identifying their remains so that they can be properly buried with their name. So for them, it's a very emotional and important aspect of the work and why it's important.
And we're delighted that you were able to come and be on TVO tonight and tell our viewers and listeners all about this. Such important work. Sarah Lockyer, Casualty Identification Coordinator and a forensic anthropologist with the Canadian Armed Forces. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
This year, it was named by The Guardian as one of the top 10 books about revenge, in the company of titles such as Wuthering Heights, Crime and Punishment, and the Bible. This true story and its protagonist lived much of his life raising a family in Canada. But during World War II, well, the title explains. It's called Escape, Evasion, and Revenge, the true story of a German-Jewish RAF pilot who bombed Berlin and became a POW. It's written by that pilot's son, Mark H. Stevens, and he joins us now in studio. I'm thrilled to have you here. I'm even more thrilled to have you actually in the studio. It's so great to be able to talk to a real human being in person again.
My pleasure,
So
Steve.
welcome.
Thanks for
Good to
inviting
have
me.
you here. What makes, this story is amazing, what makes a 20-year-old in England steal a dead former classmate's identity, enlist in a foreign army, and fight against his own country?
That's not really easy to answer because my father never spoke about it. I spent 18 years researching his story long after his death. So I had to piece this unbelievable tale together, and I'll never really know his true reasons, his true motivation. But if I had to guess, I would say it's probably the fact that his widowed mother sent he and his two siblings to safety in London during the 1930s, just after Hitler came to power. And he saw firsthand, at least through his family's eyes, what Hitler was doing to the German Jews.
He was one of those guys who did not talk about the war?
Never spoke about it.
And you didn't raise it with him?
I was too young when he died. I was just 22. So I was busy living my own life. I never got the chance to speak with my father man to man.
He had seen the early beginnings of anti-Semitism ramping up in Germany. How much do you think he was motivated by, as the title suggests, revenge?
It's really hard to say, again, because I can't be sure of his motivations. I think for sure that was a small part of his initial reason for joining up, but he wanted to do the right thing. He knew that Hitler was just the worst thing that could happen to Europe at that time, especially so close after World War I, which had devastated the continent. But I think more than that, the reason I chose to put the word revenge in the book's title is simply the fact of his survival. That was his revenge. His survival, the fact that he went on to have his own family, and I'm very happy to say, very pleased to say, that 3 years ago in Israel, his first great-grandson was born.
I've heard many people in the Jewish community say the best revenge is just surviving.
Correct.
Because extermination was Hitler's plan, obviously.
Exactly. And I wasn't raised knowing that I was half Jewish. My mother was French-Canadian Catholic. My father, as far as I was aware, was of British Anglican descent. And so we were raised as Catholics. It was only 17 years after my father's death that I discovered, through my crazy 18 years of research to put this book together, that I realized that I discovered that he was actually born a Jew in Germany.
How did you handle that realization?
It took me a while to come to terms with it, I have to say. I didn't tell a lot of people at the beginning, and then I realized I don't have anything to hide. I certainly don't have anything to be ashamed of. If anything, I should celebrate the fact, and now I do.
Here's a passage from the book where your father finds himself being ordered to bomb Berlin. Can we have this up, please, Sheldon? Nearing the center of the Third Reich, Stevens felt an unusual sensation. He asked himself whether any of the other crewmen had ever been in peacetime Berlin, such a beautiful and cultured place. Unlikely, he thought. He wondered how it had changed, sure that it now looked very different, courtesy of the RAF, the Royal Air Force. His mind strayed just slightly to the rest of his relatives, still in Germany. For all his aunts, uncles, and cousins, he felt concern, yet he suspected that they were probably dead. Even stronger in his mind than such concern, however, was the anger that demanded revenge. He vowed silently, "Many Nazis will die tonight." And can we see this picture? There he is up there. If you look over there on the wall there, Mark, that's him in the pilot seat, eh?
That's post-war. That's immediately after the war. But yes, that's him flying what I believe is an Avro Anson small executive transport, because he stayed in the Royal Air Force after the war for a couple of years and was the executive assistant to an Air Vice Marshal, which is the equivalent of a general in the Air Force, as his private pilot and German translator.
Now, admittedly, you're going in the realm of speculation here, because as you pointed out, you can't read his mind and you didn't talk to him about this. But he did 22 combat missions during the war, and at one point he's got to bomb his own home city, which is Hanover, and there's every reason to believe he's got family down there on the ground that he's being asked to bomb.
Including his mother.
Including his mother. So how does he deal with all that, do you suppose?
I think he put it out of his head. The one saving grace for him was that he didn't have to push the button. He was the truck driver. He didn't
Not the
actually,
bombardier.
he never pushed a button to drop bombs himself.
So you think that's probably how he resolved it in his own head?
I would have to guess.
Yeah. Okay, September 1941, crashes over Amsterdam, survives. Here is the wreckage. We got another shot here, his Hampton bomber, Nazis posing in front of it. Tell us the story here. How did he get shot down?
He was, that was his first trip back to Berlin in the air. It was September 7th, 1941. It was nearing the end of his first tour of duty, which was 30 missions. Right after they had dropped their bombs over Berlin, they were hit by 2 flak shells, which pierced holes in each one of his wings, which is where the fuel tanks were. So he knew immediately he would never be able to get back to England, because Berlin was a target at the extreme range of his aircraft. In fact, they had to lighten the bomb load to be able to carry enough fuel to get them there and home. So as soon as he saw the fuel tank levels falling and had a report from one of his tail gunners that there was fluid leaking out of the wings, he knew right away. So he immediately dove for the ground to avoid fighters that might be hanging around just outside of Berlin, waiting for them to head home. He ordered his crew to bail out, because with leaking high-octane fuel, the airplane might explode. And he was just going to take his chances and see what happened. Very sadly for him, he discovered after the war, his 19-year-old tail gunner did bail out upon my father's instructions, but his parachute, it is assumed, never opened. And so that boy perished. And my father felt forever guilty about that till his dying day.
How do you know that?
Because I was able to finally track down through the internet that boy's niece in England. I flew to London. I met her at the new Bomber Command Memorial, which was dedicated a few years ago. And I have to say it was a very emotional moment because my father had wanted to express his condolences and his regrets to that boy's family.
How do you know he felt guilty about that, though?
He took us to the Allied Forces Cemetery when I was 10 years old in 1967, looking for that boy's grave. We couldn't find it because his body was never identified. And that was one of 2 instances in my life where I saw my father cry.
Your dad was eventually captured. Was a prisoner of war for how long?
3 years and 8 months, a long time.
Now, the Germans didn't know what they had, though, right?
Well, fortunately for him, because as still a German citizen in effect, and a Jewish one at that, he had no protection whatsoever under the Geneva Convention. Had the Nazis ever discovered his true identity, they legally would have been able to have him executed.
So his life was saved in some respects because he had this mysterious identity that nobody knew.
He had stolen in London. He'd been in London since 1934 and had, through the 5-year period before the war, had been able to lose his German accent, had been able to learn English. He didn't really know much English when he got there, and had passed himself off as an Englishman. He had actually stolen the identity of a dead high school classmate.
Let's look at the wall again. Do you want to bring this up, Sheldon? Is this the identity card we have here, the prisoner identity card? There it is. Look at that. Have you got that?
I do.
Where is it?
It's hidden in my safe along with my father's RAF logbook.
Okay, look at that. You got to tell us about that. What are you holding in your hand there?
This is what started me on the quest. After my father died, he died in 1979, as I said, when I was 22. About 8 years later, something like that, I decided I wanted to find out what my father had done to be awarded the Military Cross, which is an exceptionally rare medal for valor it's exceptionally rare for aircrew. It was relatively common for Army veterans who fought on the ground because it is specifically for bravery on the ground in the face of the enemy. And I discovered through my research that my father had one of only 69 military crosses awarded to the Royal Air Force in World War II. And that made me think, I want to find out specifically what the piece of paper says that recommended him for the Military Cross. It took me 18 years to find it, but I finally did, in the archives, the National Archives in London, England. And this is what started me going.
Where did you find this?
This was in my father's papers. You'll see that the combat missions are written in red ink.
His handwriting?
His handwriting, correct. Absolutely. And we get to finally the last page of combat, where it's somebody else's writing who details his planned mission. Operations Berlin, force landed at Amsterdam.
Force landing at Amsterdam. They've got the last flight in there.
Right. It just says operations in somebody else's handwriting with the listing of the crew. And then in my father's handwriting, which must have been after the war, when he recovered this document, which would have been put into storage when he failed to return, Berlin, force landed at Amsterdam. In other words, he ran out of fuel as he was getting close to Amsterdam. One engine quit. The second engine, he thought he had about 10 minutes of fuel left, so he put it down in a farmer's field.
What an unbelievable keepsake that is. Incredible. That's not the most harrowing or even crazy story of survival that your father endured during the war. Do you want to tell us about hopping off the train?
Sure. Very, very early, less than a month after he was captured, in fact, he was being moved with a whole raft of prisoners from one prison camp to another on a very heavily guarded prison train. They were locked into cattle cars, probably hundreds, if not 1,000 of them. And as the train slowed down to take a curve just around dusk, he arranged for a diversion inside the car that he was being held in. He got people to hold up their blankets as shake them out as they were putting them down to bunk down for the night. And he had unscrewed the grill off a ventilator shaft and dove out. And he had prearranged with a Canadian pilot he had met who had been shot down on the same night and captured at the same time as my father, a fellow by the name of Mike Lewis, from Toronto, in fact, who I got to know afterwards and who contributed the foreword to my book. They jumped out together. Lewis was the second one out, and unfortunately for him, somebody else had done exactly the same thing in another car at the same moment. In fact, the great Roger Bushell, Big X from The Great Escape, if you'll recognize the name, also did the same thing on the same train at the same moment. Sadly, one fellow jumped out, hit the air brake connection between two cars, broke it. The emergency brakes went on immediately, automatically, and the German guards started looking out to see what was going on. They saw my father and Mike Lewis running for the woods, and they started taking target practice. Mike Lewis actually said to me in interviews after, 50, 60 years later, said to me, the bullets were whizzing by my ears like bees.
Oof. But none hit.
None hit, fortunately. They were able to hide in a wood nearby. The train later left after a perfunctory search. My father and Lewis found themselves relatively close to Dad's hometown of Hanover, and he decided to confide in Lewis, told him his story, and told him they were going to Hanover to visit my father's mother, my grandmother, to get food, money, and civilian clothing to further them onward on a journey they were hoping would take them to Switzerland.
And did he see his mother?
Sadly, when he got to his own home in Hanover, he learned that his mother had actually committed suicide just before the start of the war, some 6 weeks before the war, the outbreak of the war. She'd gotten her 3 children to safety. She was a widow. She had nothing else. The Nazis had taken all of her assets and were planning eventually to send her to a concentration camp. That seems clear. So she took the smart way out.
In total, your father made how many escape attempts?
9.
9. How many successful?
He got outside the wire on 3 occasions, including the one I just mentioned about jumping off the train. He was one of 34 prisoners that are documented to have escaped through a tunnel from a latrine cesspit in a prison camp in Poland. He was captured about 24 hours later, somewhere between Hanover and Cologne, on a train by the Gestapo, was tortured and held by the Gestapo for several days before he was finally reclaimed by the Luftwaffe guards, who took him back to their prison camp.
And yet, let's bring this next picture up, shall we, Sheldon? Chapter 4. After the war, he settles in Canada, and there is a picture with you and your brother and your dad. Which one are you?
I'm on the left, the little guy.
You're on the left. You're how old there?
4, probably.
Okay. And your brother is younger or older?
A little older.
Little older. When you look at that picture, what goes through your head?
The happiest days of my life. Dad had a lot of psychological problems, not surprisingly, after the war. He couldn't and didn't open up. He was never capable of expressing love on any way, shape, or form in any terms that humans normally would expect. I'm not even sure if he actually loved my mother. I know she loved him desperately. She came from a military family as well. Her older brother had been the colonel commanding a regiment in Montreal, an infantry regiment that had gone up through Holland and into Germany at the end of the war, and her brother was a hero. So he had difficulty with expressing emotions. But as you can see from that photograph, we were very happy.
You say you're not sure he loved your mother. Did he love you and your brother?
I think he did, but he never told us that.
Well, he'd have been of a generation that just didn't say it, but
that's possible.
But he could indicate it. He could act it.
But he never played ball with us. He never really hung out with us. He wasn't that kind of a father. He would occasionally take us out for an ice cream cone or to visit a construction site. That was about it.
A construction site because?
He was in the construction industry.
That was his business.
Yeah, he was an executive in a trade association.
Okay, we've talked about his World War II years. How about the Cold War? Did he have a special job during the Cold War?
He did. Not surprisingly, after he stayed in the Royal Air Force for 2 years after the war and was awarded the Military Cross in 1946 after his exploits came to light, and after he came clean and was naturalized as a British citizen using the name he had stolen. Those exploits came to the attention of a little shadow organization that we know today as MI6. And they asked him if he'd like,
shadow organization.
They asked him if he'd like to work for them, and he said, "That sounds interesting, I'll give that a try." And he spent 5 years with them, in fact.
What did he do?
He spied against the Soviets in East Germany. He spoke perfect German. He could pass as a German because he was one.
Now, if he didn't talk about the World War II years with you, did he talk about those years with you? Not that either.
Not really, no. In fact, I was able to meet, again through family connections and through my research, a fellow who had been one of his colleagues in MI6 in Germany. He had actually, my father had run into him. My father was driving down Front Street, stopped in front of the Royal York at a red light one day in the probably mid-late 70s, and lo and behold, here was this fellow standing on the sidewalk. My father rolls down the window, the passenger side window, and says, "Oi, Bobby Mills, what are you doing in Toronto?" So we reconnected that way, sent Christmas cards back and forth. Mills was retired and living in Germany at the time. He'd married a German lady and was quite happy there. And he became a family friend. After my father died, I used to go and visit him. Every time I was in Germany on business, I would make a point of being in Cologne on a weekend so that I could buy him lunch and pump him for information about their time together in MI6. Great stories.
This needs to be a movie. Is this a movie?
Not yet, but I'm hoping it will be. I've actually written a screenplay and getting close to being able to show it around. Thank you.
And who do you, I mean, if you're in the process of writing a screenplay, you have presumably given some thought as to who's going to play your father. What do you think?
That's a very difficult question. It's a question I get all the time. But think about it. My father was 22 years old when all of this took place. Who do you know that looks or could act as a 22-year-old? I don't know anyone. Harry Styles? I don't know. You know, Ralph Fiennes could play one of the senior officers or somebody,
yes,
and that would be great, but I don't know.
Last question. Remembrance Day. Special day in your life.
Absolutely.
What do you think of on Remembrance Day?
I think of the people who fought with my father, who lost their lives. I think of my family. I think of my grandmother, who didn't fight, but got her children to safety and sacrificed everything to do so. Most importantly, I watched the goings-on in Ottawa from the Cenotaph, and I cannot keep a dry eye, because I know, at least I think I know, I've discovered through all of this research what those people sacrificed. And the words, the greatest generation, don't even begin to say it.
That's very well said.
Thank you.
Mark H. Stevens, we remind you, the title of the book is Escape, Evasion, and Revenge, the true story of a German-Jewish RAF pilot who bombed Berlin and became a POW. What a story. Mark, thanks for making the trip into our studio today.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks for inviting me.
And that is the agenda for this Remembrance Day, Thursday, November 11th, 2021. Ontario plans to build a new highway in the GTA. Boy, that's a hard turn, eh? From World War II to building a new highway, even as local councils push back on the plan. However, it's a big story, and tomorrow, Nam Kiwanuka will find out why it's provoked such strong reactions. Hope you'll join her for that. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org. And Nam, we'll see you here tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism. Looking for more of TVO's in-depth current affairs and documentaries? Visit tvo.org/daily and sign up for our daily newsletter with links to agenda interviews, read Steve Paikin's articles, and preview our upcoming documentaries. That's all at tvo.org/daily.